Well, Griff, appreciate you hopping on. I'm gonna have to refer to you as Griffin Phelps, at least in the very beginning. That's kind of weird because I think I've only ever called you Griff before, so it's a little weird. It'll take some time to get
You've
used to
definitely
it.
never used my last name. That's for sure.
Never, never, no. But appreciate you taking the time. Once I had this idea of their story, you were one of the first people I thought about. Deeply enjoyed our conversations offline. We've worked closely together when you were back in Chicago working with Top Tier as the high school director. Myself with Prep Baseball Report, we were, in the same office. We, like I said, worked closely together. So deeply enjoyed those conversations that we've had offline. Now we get to take it online. So excited
Yeah,
for
man.
that.
I'm happy to share with the masses. And, it's been a little over a year since I've been gone, and it's awesome to reconnect with you via this route.
So biggest first question, biggest difference between Chicago and are you in Albuquerque right now?
Yeah, I am in Albuquerque.
Biggest
Let's
difference.
see. Oh, man. Okay, so the number one difference, the thing I miss most is the food in Chicago. It doesn't help that I was living just a block south of the West Loop, so I had the hottest restaurants and
Hmm.
bars and that whole scene. Now the food's good here, but it's New Mexican food, right? So you got hatch green chili and hatch red chili on everything,
Hmm.
right? The running question, the state question actually is red or green.
Nice,
So
nice.
anything you order. So I miss the food. It's a slower pace of life, so I'm learning to enjoy that. It took about 8 months for me to settle in to a little bit, slower pace.
Hmm.
But yeah, biggest difference, man. Probably the food is what I think is the hugest difference, right? You got like the
Yeah,
speed of the city and all that, but the food, man, and the service that comes with even just like a mid-grade restaurant in Chicago blows away most of the
really,
high-grade restaurants.
really.
Yeah,
That's interesting. So if,
it's just so much more competitive in Chicago. They got to
yeah,
be good.
yeah. So if I go out to visit you, I probably won't be entertained by the food very much then.
No, you'll have some stuff you never had before, and it'll be tasty, but it's very limited. We have our lane here in New Mexico, and it's about a
Hmm.
2 lane, right? Whereas in Chicago, you got an 8 lane freeway when it comes to
Yeah,
dining options.
yeah, absolutely. Well, first real question is when I think of Griffin Phelps, when I think of Griff, I think of the word winner. Where did that come from? That's a strong personality trait. When did that start and why do you think that I attribute that word with you?
Ooh, let's see that probably started when I was young, man. I mean, I got a taste of winning when I was young, and it was fun growing up. And like it's always fun to be with your friends, but there's nothing more fun than winning. And when I was at Top Tier and we were working in the same office, um, there was a high emphasis on winning, not just winning games, but right creating a winning culture, right, and developing winning in young men as more of a lifestyle, right, versus an outcome. And that's something that has been, I don't want to say pushed on me, but it's been dumped on me from an early age, right? Like even my old man, my dad, my mom, right? They just wanted me to have winning habits, and that started from like, hey, you can't go do what you want until you get done what needs to get done.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's just you get a taste of winning, and you want to win everywhere. You want to win everything, and really coming into my own realizing it was more about how you go about your business and not so much an outcome. That really is what being a winner is. And you probably got to see that in full force more than anybody when I was in Chicago.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
yeah, that's probably why.
So really great high school career, two-time All-State, New Mexico Gatorade Player of the Year. That, like you said, I mean, winning, winning is attributed to you. Is there when you have some taste of success, not only winning but success, personal accolades? Is there some complacency, and if not, why not with you?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And like 18, 19-year-old me probably got a little complacent. Um, and then, as my story went on, I learned that, oh, you can't do that. So that's before you knew me, and I kind of learned that lesson the hard way.
Hmm.
So I think that going through just kind of what I did allowed me to to be that way, I guess. And I don't attribute it to earning accolades or anything like that. I actually attribute it to more of my failures or shortcomings, whether it's, in baseball, in school, whatever, that's probably more about where it comes from as opposed to being like, yeah, I collected some accolades, but if you look further past that, you'll see that being where I was and where I went, it was much more downhill, right? There weren't so many accolades, but going through that, I think, is where it comes from.
Name something or maybe a time or two that humbled you.
Oh God, okay. The very first pitch I threw as a freshman in my first fall inter squad at U of A. So let's see, I was a freshman. We were top 10 recruit. This would have been fall of 2003, right? So spring of '04 would have been that season. I get down there and I'm like, oh man, hey, I'm 92 to 94 from the left side. I got a pretty good breaking ball, and that's in New Mexico. Oh, dude, 94 blows by everybody. So first batter I face is our center fielder Trevor Crow, who ended up being a first rounder that year. Actually made it up to the big leagues with the Indians. Um, and so I shake off. No, man, I want fastball in. Like, give me the heater in. We're gonna go big on big. I'm gonna show them who I am. And it was 94 going this way, and it was 104 going that way. And I turned and I broke my neck because I've never seen a ball hit off me that hard. And when I looked back at home plate, Trevor Crow is still standing there. And this has the turtle behind home plate with the entire coaching staff watching. And when I turn around, he looks right at me and he goes, "Welcome to the big time, motherfucker." Woo! And does the hugest bat flip I'd ever seen. Took about 30 seconds to get around the bases. And it was like, oh, this is what real baseball's like. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that was pretty humbling.
yeah, absolutely. I think of even myself. I'm trying to think of a time early on in my maybe wrestling career that I was humbled, and I honestly don't think it was until one of the last matches, really maybe my last match competitively when I was a senior in high school, a freshman, ended my career. And that,
Oh,
so I was wrestling the 106 weight class, and I'm state ranked, one of the favorites to get out of my sectional, qualify for state, and I have this freshman come and end my career. So that sucked. And I'm trying to think of something earlier, but it was really like one of the last things that it was like, man, I had a reality check coming that I didn't know I needed. But
oh God.
that freshman ended up being like a 2 or 3 time All American in college at
Ooh,
Northwestern.
okay.
So good freshman to lose to, I guess.
Right? Yeah, but it's funny how that works is when you have success early on in high school, and it's easy to set yourself apart, and it's tough to find people who can do that to you, right? So you see a lot of kids, freshmen in college specifically, that run into that humbling experience for the very first time. So I'm not surprised to hear the same story from you.
Yeah. So touch on that freshman year at U of A, because you eventually got hurt.
Yeah.
When was that? Like what's the timeline between the injury your freshman year and the severity of that injury?
Yeah, so my freshman year, let's see, the fall went pretty average for a freshman, right? Like I was struggling with trying to keep up with class and trying to make my bones on the baseball team, right? And you look around, and I was actually one of the only players on the team who had never played at the area code game. So I was like, oh man, I'm battling uphill. Had a decent fall, come out in the spring, and I'll never forget it. It was probably 2 weeks before our first game, give or take. We got inter squad. We came back. It was MLK Day, actually. Practicing. We're just doing PFPs, and I'm covering first base on a double play. I plant my foot, turn my head to catch the ball from second, and my knee just goes pop, 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 and I went skidding across the ground face first. Didn't even get my arms out in front of me, and tried to walk it off. And what I call Willis McGahee my knee. I don't know if you remember Willis McGahee
Mm-mm.
from the football player. He went to Miami, and then in the what was it national title game, he went knee to knee, and his knee went back behind his leg, and he blew it out. So when I stood up, you don't your ACL keeps your knee from doing that,
Right.
and my knee just went whoop right behind me, and I fell over again, and that's when I knew something bad was happening. So yeah, ended up having to get ACL reconstruction in my right knee. And when they were in there, they turned out that I had popped a nickel-sized hole of my cartilage right out of the middle. So they said, "Hey man, when you get to be about 30, 32, you're gonna need surgery on that. I beat them to the punch. I got that surgery about 4 years later because I like to play hard, and
Yeah.
um, I didn't stop snowboarding and doing all that. So that was my injury there. Ended up, yeah, and that was the start of the downhill slide. I went. It was a pretty big injury. I'd never had a single injury my entire life. And that was boom. So yeah, that was also a humbling moment. To circle back to that thought.
Yeah. And through the recovery, what I mean, how difficult was that? Was it more mentally taxing? Was it just physically? I mean,
There was a physical element to it for sure. I mean, they would, because you got to get your flexion and extension back right, and they would crank me down on the board and just let me sit there, and they'd be like, "Hey man, bring some music, and you're gonna tear up. We'll see you in another 20 minutes. We'll crank it down even more." So that part was tough physically, but the mental part, I actually really didn't appreciate the difficulty that it was until I look back. I'm like, wow, like you have to overcome all the not just the doubt of, hey, will my leg hold up when I'm back, but then you're so out of tune with what you're used to being able to do with your eyes closed, right? Like all of a sudden I couldn't throw a baseball where I wanted to, and that actually ended up leading in I got a case of the yips, and it made it even worse, right? Because then you're like, oh man, I'm finally healthy, but the ball was coming out hot, right? 93, 94, 95, and it was all over the map. I remember just like at one point when I was coming back, the hardest part mentally was when the coach goes, hey man, you're throwing in inner squads, but no batter's going to show up to the plate with a bat. And I'd go ball one, ball two, ball three, ball four. So, and that would be like multiple hitters in a row,
yeah.
and so that mental part of it was tough. It was excruciating. I mean, I remember calling my dad up crying like, Dad, I want to quit, like this sucks. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, well son, if you want to quit you can quit, that's on you, but just remember you'll always be a quitter. I was like, oh, I don't, that's not me. So stuck with it until eventually I blew my elbow out, and I got cut, the last time I ever got cut. And yeah, mentally that was a grind. It wasn't necessarily the mental part of trying to get back into the game. It was the mental part of like, okay, you're back in the game, but you're not who you used to be. Like, how do you handle it?
Right. On a much less severe scale, I rolled my ankle twice in sprained my ankle twice in high school, and it was actually happened once my junior year, once my senior year. Junior year, it happened at a tournament towards the end of the year, and kind of messed up the state series, the regionals, sectionals, state. That's the how it is in wrestling. The regional, sectional, state. It happened a couple weeks before that, so it was gonna mess up my you know aspirations to qualify for state. And then senior year, it happened at that same tournament on the same mat, and I think that was that when I talk about like the mental side of everything, that's when it hit me was, man, this happened. I remember when it happened, my coaches came onto the mat, wrestling had stopped, and I wasn't even worried about the ankle necessarily. The only thing that came to my mind was like not again type of thing. And that was the most troubling part for me was, man, I was just looking forward to finishing off my senior year, qualify for state, the storybook ending, and I didn't get that necessarily. And I think I could have, but I didn't get back to 100%. I think I didn't let myself get back to 100%. It was always my ankle. Okay, like I need to take today off. My ankle hurts, or I didn't, like I said, I didn't let myself get back to 100% because I constantly thought about what it would feel like if I did go 100%. And I limited myself, and then I wasted eventually 3 weeks of practice and still made it out of regionals, sectionals, like I said. I mean, you know, made it pretty far, but then eventually got beat. So, one step, a couple wins away from qualifying for the state tournament. But that's probably the biggest thing that I look back on is I didn't let myself get back to 100% mentally. And I think that affected more of my capabilities than physically.
For sure, there's you got to rebuild the trust within yourself and your body so that it can perform the way you're used to it performing. That's a huge part. And even with players I've coached who've gone through similar injuries, worse injuries, lesser injuries, you see a running theme of like, hey man, you have to build the trust within your body that you can go full force. And it may not work out, right? It may get hurt again, but you have to trust yourself that you're in the best shape possible to have that. So yeah, that's a tough battle, man.
Yeah. So now you missed the College World Series. You weren't able to participate
Yeah,
or
I
compete
was there, but I
on the
was not
field.
allowed to compete. I had to sit in the stands, which was tough.
Yeah, where were you at then? Like, were you pretty bummed? I would
Oh
assume.
man, it was exceptionally tough because I had to. The most exciting part was probably when we were at the Super Regionals. We went to Long Beach State. Excuse me, and we were facing off against Jared Weaver and that staff in '03, and Jared Weaver, right, was expected to be a first rounder, yada yada yada, as our coach Andy Lopez at the time referred to him. It was Jesus Christ and his disciples, the way that the media was portraying him, and it really was. And so we went out, we lost game one, won game two, and then I was sitting at home watching game three, and it's like, man, we go down. Our starting shortstop, Jason Donald, was a freshman All American, like a top three freshman in the country with home runs, but he also led the country with freshman errors at shortstop, and he let a ball go right through his legs, 6 hole, and came up 2 innings later and goes bases clearing double, take the lead, we
Mm.
win, and so I had to sit home for that type of excitement, and then when you get the call into the coach's office, he's like, "Hey man, you're not allowed to go, right? Because we can only roster so many players." Like, I hate to tell you, and it's like, "Yeah, I get it, coach." And then you go home, and so I flew myself out there so I could go be a part of it, experience it. But man, sitting in there and like watching your guys go to battle and on the biggest stage, right? Like that's what you dream of. I have a teacher in from eighth, ninth grade that I used to go into her office every single day, and she had a son who actually played at Rosenblatt, and that's how old I am. We were still playing at Rosenblatt Stadium, and I would see that poster on the wall every day and tell her like, "I'm gonna be there one day. You're gonna see me playing there." And when I finally got there, I was on the wrong side of the fence. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Oh, it's tough.
great experience, and it gave me the know-how, like, okay, you know how to get to this level, right? Like you can come back and do this. But it was frustrating, man. And unfortunately I never got back to that level on baseball, but I've been able to use that drive and in a lot of other places in my life now. So I credit that experience to a lot of things I'm doing now.
On your way back, you transferred to Central Arizona College, and there's I don't know your take on this word, but it's I feel like there's such a negative connotation between the word bounce back, right? Like there's I hate using that word because I feel like everyone associates it with, hey, this guy didn't have it up here, or this guy just couldn't play. Did you have that label thrown on you? And like, what's your take on that word? I've never liked it, but I just don't know. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like it's just such a commonly used term these
Uh,
days.
yeah, I mean, people might have called me a bounce back. I didn't refer to myself as a bounce back. My teammates at Central didn't call me a bounce back. And they called me plenty of other things, right? Because I couldn't throw a dang strike. But no, I totally agree with you, right? The term bounce back is tough, especially now when you got kids who are committing at eighth and ninth grade, and like they're not mentally prepared to make that decision, right? And a lot of them, I mean, you look at the percentages, right? And the percentages of people who commit prior to their junior year, and how many of those guys are gone after one semester or 1 year is super high. So it's not because they're a bounce back, right? It has nothing to do with anything other than they might have had bad information. They might have been chasing the wrong destination. So yeah, I probably threw that word around way too casually when I was coaching. Um, but I mean, it is what it is, right? Like I'm not a guy who's big on labels, and I'm a big believer in sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Like I've been called worse by better, so it
Yeah,
never got to me.
Yeah. I might have
But
heard some of those terms too being thrown your way at some
oh,
point.
sure, exactly. Yeah,
So how the JUCO career go? How the JUCO route go? I mean, so many
sucked.
great stories coming from really.
Well, yeah, I had the yips, right? So when I got to Central, we were loaded. And if you look at Central now, they're still low. They're number 2 in the country right now, right? JUCO, and our team was stacked, and I was supposed to be this guy, and all of a sudden it's like, dude, you're gonna kill somebody, Griffin. And so, I mean, I went through it all. I was seeing a sports psychologist. I was doing everything. I was going like 3 times a week, and I'd get in a game, and it'd be like ball one, ball two. I could spin a breaking ball. So whatever happened with the yips, I could throw a breaking ball anytime, any count for a strike. But obviously, you can't go in and pitch off just a breaking ball. That's going to be very unsuccessful. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I learned how to enjoy my time at the field still, right? And that's how I know I have a passion for the game, because I actually loved going to practice every single day, even when it was my bullpen day and the coach goes, "Hey man, we're going to take the net away." And at Central, you're in the middle of the desert out there. There's nothing. You got to drive 15, 20 minutes just to get to Walmart in town. And so he'd say, "Hey man, we're going to give you one baseball. There's going to be no net behind the catcher, and every time you don't hit the catcher, you're going to have to go get it." And it was like, okay, right? And it would suck, and I'd be pissed. But then I'd get over it. I'd go out in the outfield, shag, do whatever with my guys, and I learned to enjoy my friends and my teammates on a totally different level, right? Because I was doing everything I could not to talk about baseball, right? You can't say yips, right? So everybody's kind of walking around me with eggshells. It's like, yo, man, we could still kick it. I get it. I suck right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm dealing with that. But like when I'm with you guys, I'm having so much fun. So that was my big takeaway from that. And it was an interesting ride. It lasted 3 semesters. I blew out my elbow that fall of my second year at Central, and they were like, "Hey man, we're gonna cut you." I was like, "Okay, but you got to answer me one question. Like, of all the things I did, is there anything besides the fact that I just had the yips that's getting me cut?" They're like, "Nah, man, we appreciate your work ethic, and we think you set an example of tenacity and toughness. Yeah, man, now you're hurt." And junior colleges don't have a budget, so they're like, "Hey, man, we'll just clip this guy. We'll bring in a new guy at the break and call it good." And so,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the end. And that was the end of baseball for me. I wasn't done with college yet,
Mm-hmm.
but my baseball career was over at that point, as a
Yeah.
player, I should say.
And then take me inside of a meeting with a sports psychologist because that's something I'm super fascinated by. I know I Vinny Rotino is our prep baseball report Wisconsin director now, and they had a sports psychologist up with the Brewers and heard some good stories about those, and I'm interested to see what it's
Yeah,
like
it was
with.
interesting. I wish I could remember her name. I don't. It's been way too long, and it's a time I tried to forget for a really long time. But it was funny. She tried to replicate, like, "Hey, do you play baseball video games?" Like really trying to get me to see a strike zone, right? And like just be in a video game, because I was like, "Yeah, man, I play MLB The Show like all the time." I might not have been called The Show back then, but we were playing all the time, and so there was a lot of that. It was a lot of to get me to understand that I could control what I was focusing on, which I do a lot of meditation, mindfulness practice. It's way easier. Um, and sometimes they were really frustrating, right? That she would ask questions, and I wouldn't have answers, or I wouldn't be able to adequately describe like what was running through my mind, and I would just get fed up and be like, "Ah, whatever, like I'm out of here." And other days I'd be like, "No, no, no, this is awesome. I'm gonna go take it," and then I would suck again, right? Or I'd be really good one day playing catch, like, "Oh man, I'm gonna crush it today," and then I would get on the mound and I couldn't throw a strike. The craziest thing though, she said, "Hey, what about if we move the catcher?" And so my coach, I would have bullpens where the catcher would set up behind the plate for the first couple pitches and doof, 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 right all over. And then he would move just to the one batter's box, and it'd be dot, 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 five in a row, like not mid, like boom, boom, boom. And it'd be like, "Hey,
Really?
go back behind the plate," and it'd go all over the
Mm-hmm.
place. And then he would jump to the other's batter box, dot, dot, dot. And so that ended up ultimately being the piece we were trying to solve. Like, okay, what the hell is happening now? Like, why is it that when he moves 5 feet one
Mm-hmm.
direction, it's no big deal? And still to this day, I have no idea, man. But there was a lot of that. Some highs and some lows. I'd get fed up and just be like, "Nah, I'm done." Like, forget this. This isn't working. And other days where I've truly believed that she had solved the problem. It was a roller coaster.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually something I'm doing right now is trying to align like my mind with my body because I feel like too often they're not aligned. And I see it now that I'm working on it, I kind of see it in others like man, like the body's moving a little too quick and not even in sports, just in life. Your body's moving a little too quick. You got to slow it down. Your mind's moving too fast and your body's not catching up. So it's something I'm personally working on right now is kind of that meditation,
Yeah.
mindfulness, just aligning everything, making sure everything is in one place.
Yeah, I actually, when I was doing, once I started coaching and doing a bunch of training with pitchers, I actually started to incorporate a lot of yoga and mindfulness into our training for this reason, because I knew that, hey, man, if you can learn to just control your thoughts, and it's not about not having bad thoughts or not having distracting thoughts, but recognizing like, oh, okay, that's a thought that I don't need right now, and just kind of letting it flow through, right? That was something that I couldn't appreciate how easily I did that when I was locked in and prior to the yips. And it was something I had to work really, really hard to get back. And you'll hear kids even talk now like, like I'll get the yips once in a while in BP, and it's like, okay, I step off, I take a break, and I actually just hit myself in the head with the ball, and it like brings me back, right? Brings me back to the present. It's like, okay, here we go. So yeah, I totally get it.
It's a great segue into coaching. So when did you come to Chicago to be a coach? Like when did your I know you'd coached in New Mexico. When did you come to Chicago to begin your top tier high
Yeah,
school
so I
director
started off.
career?
Let's see. So the summer of 2012. So, well, let me back up to spring of 2012. I was teaching sixth grade reading language arts and social studies, and I was coaching freshman baseball for my high school. And I had within a span of 3 days, I'd gotten hired at UNM as the volunteer assistant, and then right 2 more days after that day, I got hired by Top Tier to move out there for a summer. And I was only out there for 2 months, right? I was June and July, a little bit into August just because I wanted to see the Under Armour All America game out there. And I left, came back, moved to Albuquerque, and I was 3 days away from closing on a house with she was my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now. And UNM called and said, "Hey, we don't have this job for you anymore." I was like, "Oh, okay. I don't know what to do." I was willing to work for free, so I called up Todd Fine and said, "Hey, you got a really cool company. Can I come work for you? I don't have a job anymore." and and I'll never forget what he told me. He said, Griff, you did a pretty good job this summer. If you want to come out here and try to stay in baseball, I'll give you the opportunity, but I ain't gonna make you rich. You'll have to make yourself rich. But if you want the opportunity to move yourself out, come out here and figure it out on your own." And so I wasn't the high school director then. I came out. I was coaching the third level 17-year-old team. I was I was cleaning the facility every single day and literally sitting in the office waiting for somebody to give me work. And eventually that graduated into, okay, hey man, you can work all the practices to and all the camps to, hey Griffin, you can take over a couple of these camps. And by my third year, so let's see, that's 12, 13, 2014-ish, right? Sometime, no, sorry, 2015, the winter of 2015, uh, Brian Duffy was the guy who hired me, stepped away to go to law school. And so Todd gave me the opportunity and I took it and ran with it, right? Because that was my dream. Like, it sounds crazy, but that's the biggest I was dreaming about when I was a kid was like, hey, I want to run my own baseball teams. And that started, yeah, in
Mm-hmm.
2000. So that would have been the summer of 2015, I guess, somewhere right around there. Took over as a high school director all the way up through, what was it, until I left in November 22.
Talking about cleaning the facility, working camps, then taking over camps, and kind of doing some of those jobs. You must have really had a passion for coaching and wanting to stay in baseball to kind of stick with it. Start at the bottom and work your way up. Where was that passion, and when did that passion for
Oh,
coaching start? Because it was there
sure.
at the time.
So there, well, I'd say there was a huge passion, and I had no safety net. I got zero family in Chicago. I convinced my girlfriend, I told her like, hey, I got to take this opportunity. Like we've been dating for 6 years, and I was like, yeah, you're coming with me, or we're done, right? I got to go. And so she was counting on me to make it. She didn't have a job when she went out there. We had to go find one for her. And you couple that with just, man, I love baseball. Talking to my parents, they're like, man, you were swinging a bat at 2.5 years old, like hitting a ball off the tee. And it's just always fun. Like I still don't think there's anything more fun than being in baseball, whether that's being at practice, whether that's recruiting players, whether it's helping players get to college. Like all of that is fun because that was the most fun I had. You're with your guys, and that passion never left. That side of just like, man, baseball is cool. I never looked at baseball as a way to get to college. I think that's something that is much more new age, right? Kids see it as like, oh, this is what I got to do, and it was like, man, I just have to be good enough that a college came and asked me. Like my recruiting didn't start until my senior year because that's just how it went back in 2002. And so, yeah, you put all that
Hmm.
together with like, hey man, if I don't do good at this job, I have to go back home to New Mexico where everybody knows that I proclaim like, nah, man, I'm going on to go cut my teeth on the highest level I can. And yeah, you put those two together and a little bit of luck, I guess. And that's how I got there. But the passion came from a very young age. I mean, my dad and I, we do some baseball stuff, but he was never like my coach. He was never a dad coach, anything like that. So I never got burnt out. There's only a couple times in my life I even remember my dad being like, "Yo, we're gonna go fix this at the baseball field," and one of the times was because he said I was embarrassing him. He took me down to the cages and said he took I was stepping in the bucket, right, and I bet you I was 12, 13 years old maybe, and he took two wooden stakes and just tied a big rope through them, and he planted it right behind me in the batter's box from the back to the front. And he said, "All right, I'm gonna throw you BP here, and every time you step in the bucket, you're gonna fall on your face." And so he just let me figure it out. And even to this day, it's still like he didn't yell. He's just like, "Hey, man, you're kind of embarrassing me out there, kid." So I never got that taken away by my
Yeah.
parents, which unfortunately you see that sometimes, right? The car ride home, like dad, mom, they need to be able to take the baseball cap off and say like, "Hey, man, like yeah, it sucks to suck, kid, but we'll get better tomorrow," right? And you don't see that as much now. You get kids who get berated as soon as they get in the car. I mean, I've heard horror stories of some things parents would say. So that's why I was able to hold on to that passion through all the crap that I went through. It was just a joyful place for me to be. It was also a comfortable place, right? Like I know what I'm doing here. I know that I'm good enough, and I know what it takes to succeed. So yeah,
I love your dad's subtle way. I mean, you've touched on it a couple times. It's, hey, you're always. I mean, go ahead, but you're going to be known as a quitter. Or, all right, go ahead and step in the bucket if you
yeah,
want, but
yeah.
you're going to
Very
fall.
very simple.
I really like those subtle ways to
Yeah,
reinforce a point. So that's awesome. So now you're the high school director at Top Tier and coaching in some of the coolest places, traveling to some of the coolest places that baseball can take you. Because Top Tier is one of the better travel organizations in the country. What stands out to you, or what places, tournaments, games? I mean, what stands out to you when you look
yeah.
back
So
and kind
let's
of
see.
internalize it all?
Um, there was a game. God, let's see. So like it was Tyler Snep and Danny Dollagale, Kevin Dowling, and those guys. God, that must have been like 2018, maybe when they were 16 years old, and we had a game against Gatorball right down there from Southern Illinois, Northern Missouri, right there, the Missouri Gators, and we were tied 0-0 going into the bottom of the sixth. We're the visiting team, and so Kevin Dowling tracks it. They hit a ball deep right field, and Kevin Dowling tracks it down and makes an incredible catch against the fence. Right, like I mean, boom, bounces off the fence, turns around, spins it in, and we're out of the inning. It's like holy cow! And then we come up in the seventh inning, and Tyler Snep, who is at Iowa, ends up leaving the yard at Grand Park, and one of the backfields that's closer to the main offices there. And he took it over and took it onto the roof of that building, and it was just, I mean, it was electric. Like people were going crazy. So that was a cool game.
we had another game at Grand Park where it was us
Hmm.
versus top tier Ruse, and it was going crazy. There were 50 scouts there, right? Top tier Ruse are in their first year of existence, and it's 9:30 at night. Place is packed, and there's a lot of shit talking going on, right? Because everybody knows each other. We've beaten those guys earlier in the start of the summer when we brought them out to Illinois. And in the first inning, both benches got warned by the umpires, like, "Hey, keep it down." And we're like, "Dude, we got the same logo on our hat, man. Look at how many scouts are here." And you've got scouts coming up going, "Dude, this is as good of an atmosphere as we're ever going to see in high school baseball." So that was classic. I coached a top tier team that was a combo between Ruse and us down at the PG World Series for 15U, and we were playing we're playing Elite. Um, no, no, who were we playing? Sorry, we were not playing Elite. We were playing. Oh my God, now I can't even remember. And I'll never forget, we had Hunter Mink on the mound, 92, 94, a little bit of rain. And both of these teams, all the Florida kids, knew each other. And so everybody's talking trash. I mean, you got kids stomping on metal benches and metal spikes, screaming at the top of their lungs, and we end up winning. It's back and forth, right? The lead changed 4 times in the last 3 innings, or the last 4 innings. Sorry, changed 4 times in the last 4 innings. We end up winning, and I'll never forget. The umpire came to me, and we're in the first base dugout, and the coach of the team's in the first base box, and he's like, "Man, this is crazy. Like, what's going on here?" And it's like, they all know each other. Like, they've been competing since they were 8 years old. Like, this means something. So you got cool there. And then my last one, the last game I
Hmm.
ever coached for top tier, we brought home the ship for the last tournament of the summer out at a PBR event out there. And where is it in Missouri? Creekside. And nobody knew. I knew that I was probably going to step away from coaching on field. I was going to take more of a true director role for top tier. So I knew, and nobody else knew, that this was going to be my last game I probably ever coached as 16 Americans head coach. And yeah, we battled through and took home a ship, and that's kind of how I got to end my coaching career, right? So that was a pretty special moment, especially because I knew that it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, man, you're probably not going to coach like this ever again. You're going to move on to doing something different and be like a front office guy, right? Like a real director. So those are some of my favorite memories. I mean, you could talk about any of the Sunday workouts. I love Sunday workouts with our guys. I live for those, right? They're 14-hour days, but you see 300 kids in a day, and whether they're first teamers or 10th teamers, right? You give them the same passion and they feed off that. And those are some of my favorite memories.
Man, that's awesome.
Oh, no
That's as
doubt. I
storybook ending as it gets. Going out with yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome. That gives me chills just thinking about it. And so why not tell the guys that
Oh, because players will leave. Players would leave if they didn't play for me. And that's not to toot my own horn, but hey, when the main guy who's been coaching your showcase team for 8 years steps away, like people have second thoughts. So I didn't want that to happen. And it's not about me, right? Like I don't want those guys
Mhm.
going into the game thinking, oh, we got to do this for Griff. Like that's the worst type of pressure you put because the game's not about me. I'm a coach. I don't even cross the line except to go, talk to the pitcher, talk to the infield, whatever. So yeah, I just kept it to myself and let those kids go do what they were there to do, and that game's about them. And I've always believed that, right? Game days are for players, practices are for coaches. So just keep it to myself. They don't need the extra pressure. They've got enough pressure putting on themselves.
Man, that's awesome that you went there and just kind of you're making it about them. Um, you've you've seen a lot of coaching styles, I'm sure. What have you liked from other coaches that you enforced in your coaching methods, and what have you disliked from what you've seen out there and made sure that you never did these things?
Okay, so I'll start with the worst. Like I am a huge advocate for not screaming from the dugout at a player. Right, and that's not just like, hey, you screwed up screaming, but like, hey man, kids, like think for yourselves out there, talk among yourselves. I may try and put some guys in some different positions on the field and say, hey man, hey, let's scoot over a little bit this way, yada yada. But I was never into berating a player verbally and screaming from the dugout. It's hey, you need to talk to a player and correct some actions, like do it in the dugout. Uh, don't. Everybody saw him boot that ball, or everybody saw that terrible strikeout, right? When you got guys on second and third, you're down one. So that's one that I'm just totally against and tried really hard to never replicate. One of my favorite things though, is probably the passion that came from Augie Garrido. Like when you go into YouTube and you look up Augie Garrido coaching, right? There's some crazy videos, but he had a line where he was yelling at his guys, and he said, "Man, you guys, after this loss, you guys are gonna go home tonight. You're gonna have fun. You're gonna go party, but I'm gonna have to live with this. This is my life." And I remember hearing that and thinking, like, yeah, that's what it takes. Like that's what you want to be about. Like you need to make this your life, right? And it has to mean that much to you in order for you to get a group of young men. And I mean, you're talking when I was coaching, right? That was high school kids. It's not even college guys. So you're battling with all kinds of things. But if they can see that how much it means to you, they can feed off that. They can build and they can jump on that back and ride it. So I think those are probably two two of uh, two of the parts there that I would go with from that. But I mean, there's plenty of other things,
Mhm.
right, that I take from coaches, but I think that the passion that Augie Garrido had for for his club and what he was trying to achieve with his team, and yeah, that I think that fed through me.
Thinking of teaching, coaching, and I know you did the one thing I absolutely loved and I tuned in every time was the top
Oh, ripping
tier
with Griffin.
takeover, the IG live during the COVID times. Yeah, that was awesome. I think you brought on some awesome guests. Man, it was high energy. Like I loved listening to it while I was just there playing
Right.
video games. Like there was nothing else to do during that time, so I was playing video games, listening to you and the guests you brought on, and I think it just all encompasses your passion for helping amateur athletes.
Well, somebody did it for me, right? I had some great coaches along the way who, when their time was up as a player, they wanted to share their knowledge and they wanted to provide the opportunity for young men to have the same experience. And I'll never forget, I actually ended up getting the first year I coached a serious baseball team. The last year I coached in Farmington, we were down at WWBA in Atlanta, and I went and I got a tattoo on my shoulder of a sugar skull with a lotus flower behind it. And the sugar skull is from Mexican heritage, de Dia de los Muertos. And right, it's a celebration of the end. And so I knew that at that moment I was going to celebrate the end of my playing career, and I was going to be a coach and pass on everything that I had learned because I had such an incredible time doing it. And if there are other people who want to do that, I want to provide that for them. It's not easy, right? And I know it certainly at times was not easy to play for me because of my standards and just what I expect. But I want every kid who plays baseball to have the experiences that I did. They may not go to the same tournaments, right? They may go to an NAIA school, right? But and excuse me, their experience was important to me and making sure that they got to live their baseball life to the fullest. And like I said, a lot of bodies did that for me. And you kind of get this notion of like, yeah, I know I'm hanging the spikes up. I'm not a player. And you kind of change your mind frame around, okay, what do I want to do with it? It's like, yeah, man, I want to help the amateur athlete have the greatest time of their life because that's what I got to do. And somebody helped me get there. And that's where that comes from.
You've played you played a lot of baseball in your days and coached a lot, and I'm sure you've seen it. Maybe not felt it. I'm not sure, but what does burnout look like?
Yeah. You can see it in the kids' eyes, right? Like they could still be going as hard as they possibly can physically, but you can see the fire's out, right? And it comes from a hell of a lot of different places. You get to high school, man, you got parties, you got girls, right? You got family troubles, right? I mean, all those things. You've got kids who have done nothing but baseball since they were 8 years old, and they're like, oh, wow, there's this whole new world out there, but you just see it in their eyes, and uh, it's it's not it's not an easy thing to watch, especially with kids who you're like, wow, they're really talented, and then you realize like, oh, but their passion lies elsewhere, and so it becomes this conundrum of, wow, that kid he's going as hard as he can, but I can tell that his heart's not in it, right? Like he's running fast, he's lifting weights, he's training 6 days a week, but you just see it and it's hard to watch. And all you want for those guys is to pull them aside and say like, hey man, like, do you really is this really what you're willing to put up with to get your goal? Like, and you have to have a tough conversation with them. Ask them to sit down, take a step away for a minute, and reflect on what they want to do. And sometimes it leads to the kid being like, you know what, coach, you're right. And they go do whatever they do, right? Whether it's some guys go to another sport, some guys find, they find school and they find a successful path that way. But that's what it looks like. It looks like a kid who just doesn't have it in his eyes, and you can just tell that all the work seems to be a burden as opposed to an opportunity.
What makes your story? So think of everything that you've done, everything that you've said, everything, every person that you've come across, all your experiences. What makes your story so unique, but also so achievable for someone who wants to go to Division 1 or become a coach, high school director? What makes your story unique, but also so achievable?
Uh, the uniqueness, probably, like I'm a kid who came from a small town in Farmington, New Mexico, right? Like when I was growing up, we didn't have a second high school in my town until I started eighth grade. And I got to the pinnacle of college baseball, right? I got to say no to a six-figure offer out of high school. Stupid, but I got to experience that, and I got to be part of a top 10 recruiting class in the country. I got to go to the College World Series, right? And then my start crashed, and I went from the top of the top to the bottoms of the bottom, and was out of baseball within 3 years of being the Gatorade Player of the Year, right? So I think there's the uniqueness in coming from the small town, but I mean, that's a story that plays itself out across America for a lot of people. And just because you don't make it in baseball as a player doesn't mean you can't go on and be a coach, can't be a great trainer. Doesn't mean you can't impact baseball in another way. And I figured that out, right? And that's a very common theme I think against baseball is there's a lot of guys who their careers didn't go the way that they pictured it or on the path that they started. But if you have a passion for the game and you enjoy being around baseball, like what you learned in your time as a player can definitely provide you the opportunity to then stay in baseball and go impact it in a totally different way, right? And I'm sure there's a million kids out there who are like, that won't happen to me, but they'll see, like it does. And so it's a very relatable story in that sense, right? Like, hey, man, I was a big time prospect. I was this, I was that, and then I was a nobody. And it was like, oh, what happened to him? It's like, you find your way, you make it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a theme that I think any player can can recognize, right? They may not see it right away, right? They're 15, 16 years old, they're doing their thing, but as time goes on, you start to realize there's a lot of opportunity in the game for you to be impactful. And I hope that everybody who has a passion for it realizes that, yeah, there's actually probably 90% of people who are part of baseball are not players, right? And so I think that makes it super relatable and just unique because I don't know, I'm a kid from a small town. Like you have a few more kids from New Mexico that have made it since, but yeah, man, from a little small town in Podunk, Farmington, New Mexico, like 25,000, maybe 30,000 people total, which I guess is not terribly small, but that's it, man. I like to think that it's much more relatable than it is unique, to be honest.
What's next for Griffin Phelps?
Oh,
Is he gonna coach again?
we'll see.
Will he be in the dugout?
I mean, I would love to get back in the dugout. I have some different responsibilities now. I got a 2.5-year-old daughter. Uh, I've
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot more time on my hands now that I'm not coaching and getting to enjoy that. I would like to get into baseball. I joke with people all the time. I could go coach 8-year-old baseball just as easily as I can go coach high level baseball. That in between, that doesn't really fit for me. I need it on either end of the spectrum. So I've contemplated with,
Mm-hmm.
like, volunteering my time for maybe, like an 8-year-old little league or something around here. I did step into a friend of mine. Some guys that I grew up playing with their sons. They own a baseball facility out here, ABA, where Alex Bregman comes from, Blake Swihart came from, and so I actually went into their facility finally after probably a good 12 to 13 months of not being anywhere to do with baseball. And I looked around and was like, I got a little bit of an itch. So, but I don't think I could ever coach for competitively for somebody besides top tier. Those are my guys. I'd loved every second I had with them. So if you guys are listening, I'd love to get on a coaching staff for a select team. Maybe go see you guys out in North Carolina. But no, I work in the solar industry now. I have the opportunity. I'm building out a new team and a new division within our company, and just getting to take all these lessons I learned from baseball and apply them to the real world, because baseball is not the real world. And we'll see what baseball has in store for me next. Right now, it's enjoying the WBC. I'm getting prepped for my fantasy draft coming up on Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
and I think for the first time, getting to enjoy just being a real fan and not looking at everything from a coach's lens, right? And being able to not have to evaluate every single action that happens on a baseball field. So we'll see if that leads to coaching. I would like to think that I'll have a chance to coach again, whether it's my daughter playing baseball, softball, whatever. Um, we'll see. But that right now, I'm really happy with where I am. Like I said earlier, it took a long time to settle into this new lifestyle, but I got baseball to thank for it, right? Like I'm doing all right. I got a happy family. I'm close to my parents and the rest of my family out here in New Mexico. So we'll have to see what the cards hold for me.
Yeah, and now you have your most important coaching responsibility
Oh
with your
man,
daughter.
you can't
So
coach your daughter like you coach 16-year-old boys. That's for sure.
no, you can't.
But you can still teach
You
the same
can't.
lessons, like yeah, some discipline, some respect, right? Like just those little things. So yeah, I guess I'm still coaching on the daily.
Griff, appreciate it, man. This was awesome. I think a lot of people are going to take a lot of wisdom from this conversation, and it means a ton to me.
Well, Tino, I got to say thanks for having me here, and I need to give you a little due credit. I saw you come in as a bushy-eyed little intern for PBR, and look at what you're doing now, man. Like your story's no different than mine. You're finding a way to impact in sports, and it's been pretty impressive to watch you. I don't want to say grow up over the last, what is it, like is it 6 years now since you started working there? 5 years, right?
5 years, yeah, 5 years, which seems like a
Yeah.
lifetime now.
And
Yeah,
so,
seems
man,
like
dude, it's awesome to see you
yeah.
doing this, having me on this show. Man, I really appreciate it. This is fun, and hopefully somebody somewhere is able to take one nugget from this and apply it and be able to go chase down their dreams, right? Because there's nothing better than dream chasing, right, and achieving those goals. And so, thanks for giving me an opportunity to share my story,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully, it people enjoy it, and if they don't, they don't. But it is what it is. But man, watching you get to where you are today has been pretty cool, and I feel like this is a real full circle for us right here. So thank you for the opportunity, Tino.